On August 12, 2024, just hours before her 39th birthday, Victoria Gamble's life was brutally cut short inside her own apartment in Sauk Rapids, Minnesota. A night that began with casual drinks at a local bar ended in tragedy when she encountered Christopher Neal, a man who'd been released on bail just 9 days earlier for strangling another woman. Within 2 hours of meeting him, Victoria, a loving mother of 2 young boys, would become the victim of a crime that exposed the devastating failures of our justice system. What makes this case particularly chilling isn't just the brutal manner of Victoria's death, but how the warning signs were there all along. Christopher Neal, already facing charges for domestic assault by strangulation, was free on bail when he allegedly took advantage of Victoria's trusting nature. Using their shared hometown connection as bait, he gained her confidence in those final fatal hours. The security cameras would silently record their movements, entering her apartment at 1 a.m., him leaving alone at 3 a.m. with her car keys, but they couldn't capture the horror that unfolded behind closed doors. This is the story of Victoria Gamble, a mother whose boundless trust in others and bubbly personality drew people to her, but ultimately led her into the path of a predator. It's a tragic reminder of how a single encounter can forever change the lives of families, and how the system meant to protect vulnerable women sometimes fails them in the most devastating ways. The morning of August 12, 2024 began like any other in Sauk Rapids, Minnesota. Victoria Gamble's sons were waiting for their mother to join them for her birthday breakfast, a tradition she never missed. But this year, the chair at their favorite diner would remain empty. As morning turned to midday, Victoria's phone went straight to voicemail, her apartment remained silent, and her worried friends finally contacted the authorities. At 10:30 a.m., officers responded to a welfare check at the Riverside Apartments complex. The scene they discovered would haunt even the most seasoned investigators. Victoria's body lay in her second-floor apartment, showing signs of a violent struggle that had played out just hours earlier. The normally immaculate living space was disturbed, furniture askew, personal items scattered, telling the story of a desperate fight for life. Through the lens of security cameras, investigators began piecing together Victoria's final hours. The footage painted a haunting timeline. At 11:47 p.m. on August 11th, Victoria had arrived at the local bar, looking forward to celebrating her upcoming 39th birthday. By 12:15 a.m., cameras captured her in conversation with a man later identified as Christopher Neal. They seemed to be sharing stories, laughing, finding common ground in their shared hometown. At 1 a.m., they left together in her black Chevy Equinox. The next images would prove crucial to the investigation. At 1:05 a.m., security cameras at Riverside Apartments captured Victoria and Neal entering her building. 2 hours later, at 3 a.m., the cameras recorded Neal alone. His behavior had changed dramatically. He was now actively avoiding the cameras, turning his head away, shielding his face. In his hands were Victoria's car keys and apartment fob, items her family would later confirm she kept securely in her purse. The crime scene told investigators what the cameras couldn't capture. Victoria's bedroom showed signs of a violent assault, with evidence suggesting she had fought fiercely for her life. Most telling was what was missing. Her black Chevy Equinox had vanished from its assigned parking spot, along with her phone, wallet, and several personal items. As detectives processed the scene, a critical alert came across their desk. The man from the security footage matched the description of someone who had been released on bail just 9 days earlier, charged with domestic assault by strangulation in a neighboring county. Christopher Neal was already in their system, and now he was on the run with a dead woman's car. Modern technology would prove crucial in the manhunt that followed. Investigators tracked Neal's cell phone as it moved steadily south, crossing state lines. The signal eventually led them to a motel parking lot in Louisiana, over 1,000 miles from Sauk Rapids. There sat Victoria's black Chevy Equinox, and inside a ground floor room, they found Christopher Neal. When confronted by investigators, Neal's story immediately raised red flags. He admitted to being in a woman's apartment in Sauk Rapids but claimed he couldn't remember her name, this despite spending hours talking about their shared hometown. Even more suspicious, he insisted she was alive when he left, yet couldn't explain why he had fled with her car and belongings. The medical examiner's preliminary findings would soon shatter Neal's claims of innocence. Victoria had died from strangulation, with severe trauma to her neck and throat. The marks told a story of a prolonged, violent struggle, one that matched almost exactly the method described in Neal's previous assault case just days before. Long before her name would appear in headlines, Victoria Gamble was known throughout Sauk Rapids for her vibrant spirit and boundless love for her 2 young boys. Her friends described her as someone who could light up any room, a woman whose infectious laugh and bubbly personality drew people to her naturally. At 38, She had built a life centered around her children, working hard to create a stable, loving home in their quiet Minnesota community. Those who knew Victoria best said she approached motherhood with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything in life. Her boys were her world, and she had carefully chosen the Riverside Apartments complex for its safe neighborhood and proximity to their school. Every morning, she would wake early to make their breakfast, never missing a school event or sports game. The thought that she would miss her birthday breakfast with them was unthinkable to those who knew her dedication as a mother. Victoria always saw the good in everyone, her sister would later write in a heartbreaking social media post. That's who she was, someone who believed in giving people a chance, in the basic goodness of others. This trusting nature, a quality that made her so beloved in her community, would ultimately be exploited by the man who took her life. The day before her murder, Victoria had been excitedly planning her 39th birthday celebration with her sons. She had promised them a special breakfast the next morning, followed by a day at their favorite park. Her last text to her best friend read, "Can't wait for tomorrow, another year older, but grateful for every moment with my boys." Those words would later be read at her memorial service, a testament to the devoted mother whose life was cut tragically short. Victoria's apartment reflected her personality, warm, welcoming, and filled with photos of her children. On her refrigerator, investigators found a calendar marked with her son's activities, upcoming school events, and her own birthday circled in bright red marker. The morning she was killed, she had planned to open birthday cards her boys had carefully hidden in the kitchen cabinet the night before. What made the tragedy even more heartbreaking was how hard Victoria had worked to create a safe, stable life. She was known for being cautious, especially when it came to her children's safety. Her decision to trust Christopher Neal that night seemed out of character to those who knew her best, but friends later recalled how he had cleverly used their shared hometown connection to lower her guard. She probably felt safe because he knew all the same places, all the same people, one friend noted. He used that familiarity to make her feel comfortable. The investigation would reveal that Victoria had spent that final evening at a bar she knew well, surrounded by familiar faces. She wasn't the type to go home with strangers, but Neal had spent hours gaining her confidence, playing on their shared background and appearing harmless. Security footage showed him acting charming and friendly, giving no indication of the violence that would follow. August 11, 2024, started as a typical summer evening in Sauk Rapids. Victoria had decided to stop by Murphy's Bar, a local establishment she frequently visited with friends, for a quiet drink before her birthday. The security footage from that night would later become crucial evidence, capturing every moment of her fateful encounter with Christopher Neal. At 11:47 p.m., cameras showed Victoria entering the bar wearing a blue summer dress, her favorite silver necklace catching the light. She chose a seat at the corner of the bar, ordering what would be her first and only drink of the night. It was around midnight when Christopher Neal first approached her. The security footage showed him deliberately choosing the seat next to her, despite several empty spaces at the bar. What initially seemed like a chance encounter would later reveal itself as something more calculated. Neal, as captured on the bar's cameras, spent the next hour engaging Victoria in conversation. He mentioned knowing her hometown, dropping names of places and people she knew. With each shared connection, Victoria's natural wariness seemed to fade. The footage showed her becoming more animated, laughing at his stories, her guard lowering with each passing minute. He seemed so normal, so familiar, the bartender would later tell investigators. They looked like old friends catching up, but Neal was far from the harmless figure he portrayed. Just 9 days earlier, he had been released on bail for a violent strangulation attack, a fact Victoria had no way of knowing as she sat beside him. At 1 a.m., the cameras captured what would be Victoria's final moments in public. Neal had offered to drive her home, citing concerns about her safety. The bitter irony of this gesture wouldn't be lost on investigators. Victoria was seen gathering her purse, her car keys glinting in her hand as she led the way to her black Chevy Equinox. The drive to Riverside Apartments took only 5 minutes. Security cameras in the parking lot recorded their arrival at 1:05 a.m. Victoria appeared relaxed, laughing at something Neal said as they walked toward the building's entrance. She used her key fob to let them in, the door closing behind them at 1:07 a.m. It would be the last time Victoria was seen alive. What transpired in the next 2 hours would only be pieced together through forensic evidence and the signs of struggle left behind. The layout of Victoria's apartment suggested she had initially invited Neal in willingly, perhaps for coffee or conversation. 2 cups were found on the kitchen counter, one with traces of lipstick matching Victoria's shade, the other untouched. The violence appeared to have erupted suddenly. Evidence indicated that Victoria had fought desperately for her life. Her broken nails, the overturned furniture, and the scattered contents of her purse painted a picture of a terrifying struggle. The medical examiner would later determine that the attack lasted several minutes, with Victoria conscious and fighting throughout most of it. At precisely 3 a.m., security cameras captured Neil leaving the building alone. His earlier friendly demeanor was gone, replaced by furtive glances and attempts to hide his face. He carried Victoria's car keys, which investigators noted had been in her purse, not on the counter as he would later claim. The footage showed him getting into Victoria's Equinox and driving away, leaving her lying lifeless in the apartment where she had built a home for her children. The investigation into Victoria's murder shifted into high gear once detectives realized they weren't just dealing with a random act of violence, but potentially the work of a serial offender. The crime scene at Riverside Apartments became a focal point of forensic activity, with investigators meticulously documenting every detail of the tragic final moments of Victoria's life. The medical examiner's findings painted a horrific picture of Victoria's final struggle. The bruising patterns on her neck told a story that contradicted Neil's claims of innocence. These weren't the marks of a brief encounter, noted the lead forensic investigator. The injuries showed sustained pressure, applied with practiced precision. Most disturbing was the similarity to the injuries reported in Neil's previous assault case, a pattern that suggested not just violence, but a signature method of attack. DNA evidence would prove crucial to the investigation. Swabs taken from Victoria's neck revealed genetic material from two sources. Neil's DNA emerged as the dominant profile, particularly concentrated in areas showing the worst bruising. A second, weaker DNA profile was also detected, but investigators quickly determined this likely came from casual contact earlier in the day, perhaps from one of her children or a friend. Victoria's apartment, typically kept immaculate for her children, had become a map of her final fight for life. A broken lamp in the living room suggested where the attack began. Scattered cushions and an overturned coffee table traced her desperate attempt to escape. Most telling was her bedroom, where investigators found her phone still plugged into its charger. She never had a chance to call for help. The evidence trail extended beyond the apartment. Security footage from neighboring buildings captured Neil's exit from the complex in Victoria's car. Traffic cameras tracked the black Chevy Equinox heading south on Highway 10, then merging onto Interstate 35. Each ping from Victoria's stolen cell phone helped investigators track Neil's flight to Louisiana, where he apparently believed he could evade detection. When authorities finally caught up with Neil at a motel just outside New Orleans, they found more damning evidence. Victoria's car keys were in his pocket, her credit cards in his wallet. Her phone had been wiped clean and abandoned in a dumpster 3 states away. These weren't the actions of someone who, as Neil claimed, had left a woman alive and well in her apartment. Most incriminating was Neil's behavior during questioning. His claim of limited memory about the events in Victoria's apartment stood in stark contrast to his precise recall of their earlier conversation at the bar. He remembered details about their shared hometown but claimed to forget her name. When shown photos of Victoria's apartment, he recognized where he had been but insisted he couldn't remember what had happened there. The autopsy results delivered the final pieces of evidence needed to build a solid case. Victoria had died between 2:30 and 3 a.m., exactly the time frame when Neil was still in her apartment. The cause of death was manual strangulation, with defensive wounds on her hands and arms showing she had fought desperately until her last breath. Most chillingly, the method of strangulation matched exactly the technique described by Neil's previous victim, a woman who had survived to tell her story just 9 days earlier. Christopher Neil's path to becoming Victoria's alleged killer didn't begin the night they met at Murphy's bar. As investigators dug deeper into his past, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of escalating violence that painted a picture of a predator growing increasingly bold and dangerous with each passing year. Just 9 days before Victoria's murder, on August 1, 2024, Neil had faced charges for a strikingly similar attack. In that case, he had allegedly strangled a woman he was dating in Akin County. The victim survived to tell a haunting story that would later mirror Victoria's final moments. He seemed so normal at first, she had told police. Then something changed in his eyes, and his hands were around my throat. Despite the severity of this attack, Neil was released on bail on August 3, given a no-contact order, and walked free. But this wasn't just about 2 isolated incidents. As investigators pieced together Neil's history, they found a trail of police reports, restraining orders, and domestic disturbance calls stretching back years. Women in different counties had reported similar encounters, charm turning to violence, with strangulation being his weapon of choice. Most cases had been handled as routine domestic disputes, the pattern going unnoticed until it was too late. The evolution of Neil's violence was particularly chilling. He had started with domestic incidents, attacking women who knew him. Victoria represented a deadly escalation, the first time he had allegedly targeted a stranger. The shift from domestic violence to attacking someone he had just met showed a predator growing more confident, more brazen in his choices of victims. His method of approaching victims revealed careful calculation. With Victoria, he had used their shared hometown connection to gain trust. Security footage from Murphy's bar showed him watching her for nearly an hour before making his move, waiting until she was alone before approaching. This wasn't opportunistic violence, it was practiced, planned predation. Even more disturbing was Neil's behavior after each attack. In previous cases, he had shown a pattern of minimizing his actions, claiming memory loss, or insisting the women had exaggerated their injuries. With Victoria's case, he followed the same playbook, admitting to being in her apartment but claiming no memory of the violence, despite the clear evidence of his deliberate actions afterward. The violation of his no-contact order from the August 1st case revealed another aspect of Neil's personality, a complete disregard for legal restrictions. On the very day Victoria's body was discovered, August 12, the Akin County Sheriff's Office was already processing paperwork for his violation of the order. He had allegedly attempted to contact his previous victim, showing a pattern of continued harassment that would only end with his arrest for Victoria's murder. What made Neil particularly dangerous was his ability to appear harmless. Bar patrons who saw him with Victoria described him as charming, well-spoken, and completely normal. This facade of normality allowed him to move through society virtually undetected, making him the kind of predator that law enforcement finds most challenging to stop before tragedy strikes. The manhunt for Christopher Neil ended at the Red Pine Motel, a rundown establishment just outside New Orleans, Louisiana. After nearly a week of tracking cell phone signals and following Victoria's stolen credit card transactions, authorities finally closed in on August 18, 2024. They found Victoria's black Chevy Equinox parked outside room 114, its Minnesota plates covered with mud in an apparent attempt to avoid detection. The arrest itself was anticlimactic. Neil surrendered without resistance when federal marshals and local police breached his room at 6:15 a.m. He was found fully dressed, lying on top of the bed covers, as if he had been expecting them. In his possession were Victoria's car keys, credit cards, and apartment key fob, items he had taken from her purse after allegedly taking her life. What struck investigators was Neil's demeanor during arrest. He showed no emotion, no signs of distress or surprise. When informed he was being charged with Victoria's murder, he reportedly just nodded and said, "I want a lawyer." This cold composure contrasted sharply with the violent struggle evidenced in Victoria's apartment just days before. The charges against Neil began to stack up quickly. In Benton County, where Victoria's murder occurred, prosecutors filed second-degree murder charges. The criminal complaint detailed the brutality of the attack, citing the medical examiner's findings of severe neck trauma and defensive wounds. The DNA evidence, security footage, and Neil's flight to Louisiana were listed as key elements supporting the murder charge. But Neil's legal troubles extended beyond Victoria's case. In Akin County, he still faced charges for the August 1st strangulation attack. The violation of his no-contact order from that case added another charge. Prosecutors in both counties began coordinating their efforts, building a case that would show Neil's pattern of escalating violence. During his first court appearance in Benton County, Neil maintained his story of limited memory about the night of Victoria's death. Through his court-appointed attorney, he entered a not guilty plea. The prosecution, however, painted a different picture. They described a calculated predator who had watched Victoria at the bar, gained her trust through manipulation, and then killed her in her own home. The bail hearing revealed the full extent of the prosecution's concerns about Neil's danger to society. They presented evidence of his previous strangulation attack, the violated no-contact order, and his attempt to flee the state. The judge, noting the escalating pattern of violence and flight risk, ordered Neil held without bail, a decision that brought visible relief to Victoria's family in the courtroom. As Neil was led away in shackles, attention turned to the broader implications of his case. Questions arose about how he had been free to allegedly kill Victoria despite the recent strangulation charge. The prosecutor's office faced scrutiny over their handling of his previous case, where he had been released on bail despite showing clear signs of being a danger to women. In the quiet Minnesota town of Sauk Rapids, the impact of Victoria's murder rippled through the community like shockwaves. Her two young boys, who had waited eagerly for their mother to join them for birthday breakfast that August morning, now faced a future without her guidance, love, an ever-present smile. Their lives, once filled with the routine of school days and their mother's constant presence, had been shattered by one night of senseless violence. Victoria's family launched a GoFundMe page, not just to cover funeral expenses, but to create a trust fund for her son's future. The page became a testament to who Victoria was, filled with stories from those who knew her. She was more than just a victim, wrote her sister. Victoria was the kind of person who would give you her last dollar if you needed it. She taught her boys to be kind, to be strong, and to always help others. Now we have to help them carry on without her. The local community's response was overwhelming. Murphy's Bar, where Victoria spent her final hours, hosted a fundraiser for her children. Regular patrons shared stories of her infectious laugh, her proud conversations about her boys' achievements, and her bubbly personality that could brighten even the darkest days. She wasn't just another customer, the bartender recalled. Victoria was family to everyone who knew her, but beneath the outpouring of support ran an undercurrent of anger and frustration. Victoria's death had exposed critical failures in a system designed to protect vulnerable individuals. Her family spoke out publicly about these systemic gaps. 9 days, her brother said during a community meeting. Just 9 days between Neil's release and Victoria's death. The system had him in custody, knew he was dangerous, and still let him walk free. The impact of Victoria's death extended beyond her immediate circle. Local domestic violence organizations reported an increase in calls for help, with many women citing her story as their wake-up call. The Sauk Rapids Police Department began reviewing its protocols for handling strangulation cases, acknowledging that these incidents often precede more serious violence. In a cruel twist of fate, Victoria's birthday, August 12, now marks both her death and her legacy. Her family has established the Victoria Gamble Foundation, dedicated to raising awareness about domestic violence and advocating for stricter bail conditions in strangulation cases. "We couldn't save Victoria," her mother said at the foundation's launch, "but maybe we can save someone else's daughter, someone else's mother." As Christopher Neal awaits trial in Benton County, Victoria's story continues to resonate. Her death has become a catalyst for change, prompting discussions about how the justice system handles violent offenders and the need for better protection for potential victims. But for those who loved her, Victoria was more than a cautionary tale or a statistic. She was a mother who lived for her children, a friend who never failed to lift others up, and a woman whose trust in others ultimately cost her everything. Today, Victoria's apartment at Riverside remains empty, a silent reminder of the tragedy that unfolded there. Her black Chevy Equinox, recovered from Louisiana, sits in an evidence lot. But her spirit lives on through her sons, through the foundation bearing her name, and through the changes her death has inspired in her community. While it's too late for Victoria, her story serves as both a warning and a call to action, a reminder that patterns of violence, left unchecked, can escalate with devastating consequences.